Hello and welcome to the Sideline Live podcast. My name is Orla Keeling and I am the host of the podcast, where every week we bring you a brand new episode with guests ranging from Olympic champions to local heroes, coaches, support staff and anybody involved in the world of sport. Each week we will dive into different topics, including current affairs in sport, identity, skill, mindset, coaching, and also shine a light on those flying under the radar. So tune in every week for brand new episodes, new stories, and new insights you've never heard before. Okay, I usually say I'm delighted, but today I'm extremely excited to have Mr. James Kerr on the podcast. James, it's a pleasure. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
In terms of, I was trying to come up with questions and I'm a little bit overwhelmed in terms of I have so much I want to get through and what I want to ask you, but I do want to know, how does a guy mid-20s working in advertising in Sydney get involved in this world and get where you are today?
Well, actually, it happened as all good things happen in a pub. And a friend of mine is a photographer, and his speciality was rugby league. He had sort of become a cadet photographer shooting rugby league in Australia, massive, sport. And we hatched this cunning plan to do a book on the Australian Kangaroos. One of the winningest teams in the world, one of the most dominant teams in their realm, and particularly this particular team was pretty awesome. And so we kind of talked our way in on tour, the 1990. This is going to date me a bit, but the 1990 Kangaroo tour of England and France, and I got the bug. I kind of was inside, and I experienced what an elite environment is like, and what leadership in that environment is like. And I came up through advertising. I'm a writer, and but a lot of around what advertising is about and kind of identity is encapsulating the spirit of something. And so my skill set, if you like, is about that. And I found that is both kind of valuable to translate that high performance environment to other environments, but also work in those high performance environments, to be able to encapsulate what really matters, beliefs, behaviors, purpose, vision, values, standards. So I bring that kind of writer's methodology, I guess, to creating cohesive units, and working with leaders on how they can do that, how they can create an optimum performance environment. But the beginning was the Australian Rugby League team, and particularly, I've told this story many times, but we promised not to sort of double up on some sort of previous stories, but I think it's one worth telling, if that's okay, about a guy called Bobby Fulton. And my first day with the team, and I was very, very nervous, totally freaked out. These guys were gods. I was this guy, and I was sitting, and I met them, and they just lost at Wembley, so they weren't very happy. Bunch of very unhappy, very big Australian Rugby League players, and I was sitting right at the front of the bus. Obviously, the coach, the most sort of junior member of the group, not even part of the group at that point. And the players came on in ones and twos, and most of them ignore me. But one particular player, who shall be nameless, called Blocker Roach, stopped in front of me and looked me up and down. And in pure Australian vernacular, let's say, who the is this, right? In front of everybody and in front of me. And I was like mortified. I thought, this is not going to work, right? And so I was sitting there kind of stewing in my discomfort, and the bus took off, heading up to Manchester. We were in London, Wembley, heading up to Manchester. And there was a tap on my shoulder, and it was Bobby Fulton, who was the coach, a legend, total legend, and the coach. And he just tapped me on the shoulder and he kind of gestured, get up, son. And he gave me a test tie, a commemorative tie from that test match, and a handshake, no words. And I was in. It was a signal. It was a signal that I was part of this group. And from that moment on, I was part of this group. And, there's so much in that moment. It was acceptance, and it was fantastic, and it turned to be a life-changing experience, the tour. But also how emblematic of great coaching and great leadership. First, the empathy and the vigilance and the emotional sensitivity to read the room and what was happening and what was needed. And then the kind of simple brilliance of communicating without words a way to establish what was important. And he wasn't doing it just for me, he was doing it for me, but cohesion for a group is hugely important. And so it was I wrote about and I thought about that moment a lot. And I guess it was one of those moments that I kind of realized there's more to sport on the inside than there is from the outside. A lot of the time we watch, and certainly fans watch, the sort of the armchair warriors watch sport from the outside thinking they know what's going on. And if only you picked a certain player, everything would come right. But of course, it is a much more complex and extraordinary environment on the inside, and having the sensitivity and the sensibility, I guess, to understand those dynamics fascinated me, and I guess it will always fascinate me, and has drawn me to really combine that sort of that writing talent, that observational talent, I guess, and that fascination with the dynamics of how human beings work well together.
How important is that for you and the work you've done in terms of typically in sport, particularly I find in Ireland, we look to have the former great player go in and give their 2 cents and coach and whatever. But you came in very fresh, very open eyes, hadn't been in an environment. You mentioned you got the bug. How important is that still to this day of just going in with a very different background? Like I'm reading or I'm trying to get through the audiobook of The Range. It's a fantastic book.
Mm.
How much has that influenced the way you work and the way you observe?
Yeah, I think you have to be, well, in my I have an unusual role. There aren't many of us doing this. There are some, but um being a kind of an insider and outsider, so you need a foot inside and outside. You know, one of the added value pieces, I hate that phrase, but is the ability to say the stuff that needs to get said. And to come in and say, you know, if you don't meet your standards, how can you expect to meet your vision? Your end goal. Now, if you're a manager, a coach, strength and conditioning guy, even, within an environment, you've got to maintain a relationship over a longer period of time. And so it can be difficult to say what needs to get said. And so that's a massive benefit from that. I think there's a massive benefit just coming in and observing and coming from a point of difference, not part of the group think. Um, and I think one of the things I benefit from is I work across different domains. I've worked in elite sport. I've worked with elite military units. I've worked in at a C-suite and at a board level in business. Um, uh, the Each domain is different, but somehow the same. The print. I would sort of say that I don't believe in analogies. The analogy of rugby doesn't really carry to business, for instance. The analogy doesn't. It's a different game, you know. But the principles at play with around leadership and team dynamics and so on and so forth, culture, environment, they're the same, really. Human beings are all different, but we're all the same. And I think the great leaders cut beyond the sort of superficial difference into well, what really drives us? what are we really looking for as human beings? You know, who do we need to be? How are we seen and heard and valued? All of those things are fundamentally human and humanist and athlete centered and people centered. And I think again, one of the things that I can bring is a like a reactivation of the fact that at the bottom of that performance pyramid there are people, you know, and the principles that drive human behavior are consistent because we're all human.
You're a pro. I was going to ask you, is greatness the same in, in those different areas? Like, I was trying to think of the vessel that we see people, whether it's athletes, business,
Mm.
surgeons. Is it pretty much all the same, just expressed in different ways?
Yeah, because I think greatness is a destination you can never come across. So the expression of it is to get better every day. You know, that's consistent. Be a better surgeon, be a better athlete, you know, be a better podcaster, you know, be a better author. Just try to get better every day. Great, aim for greatness. But it's always out of reach. It should always be out of reach, you know. Um, and so there's a lovely Maori proverb: aim for the highest cloud, because even if you come short, you'll hit a lofty mountain. And there's also a phrase I use in legacy, champions do extra. It's those marginal gains, it's those incremental achievements, those the tap 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 at the coalface that gets you where you want to go. So you need to toggle between the both. You need your ambition. You need to keep your eyes on the horizon. But I think greatness happens in the moment, every moment. In the here and now. Here and now is where it all happens. And so a large part of performance is about um, being prepared for and to perform in the moment. And the old line is Bill Walsh line: the score will take care of itself. You can't control the outcome. You just can control what you can control. That tends to be the task and what you're actually doing.
When you look at the individuals, then you do a lot of work with teams, but my favorite question of all time is, what separates the great ones from the rest? Like, what are the attributes, the characteristics that you see across the different domains that you've been exposed to?
Yeah. Um, there's a line actually from Goldman Sachs, and it's something like um, discipline, focus. I can't remember the order. Discipline, focused, and focus and intensity. Certainly focus. And another line. That clarity is intensity. When you know what you're doing, so the ability to say no to what doesn't matter and say yes to what does, and to be really clear on what matters, I think is hugely important. Work rate. Um, but my final, again, I'm just slightly aware. This is one of the quotes that I trot out, and I think it's a really powerful insight. When the Special Boat Service, the UK Special Force unit, the maritime unit, was formed. It was formed by a guy called Roger Courtney, and Roger Courtney um, advertised for new recruits. They had about 3 of them, and they needed more. And the line was something like, "We're not looking for people with discipline. We're looking for people with self-discipline." And disciplined people know what to do because somebody else told them. Self-disciplined people know what to do because they know what to do, and they hold themselves to account. And I think of anyone who is going to kind of hold the line, it's that intrinsic motivation, that intrinsic self-discipline, the holding yourself to the highest standards, that I think. Now, you can be good and not get there, but and again, that kind of rating system between good and great, people will rise to the level they can rise to. The only real task, I think, is to perform your personal best, and not to think of yourself in comparison, because we'll compare ourselves to, Richie McCaw or Michael Jordan or Don Bradman or whoever, right? Pele. Um, but really, and it's a cliche in sport, but it's true. You just want to be better than you were yesterday, and you want to, another cliche, leave it all out on the field, and that's all you can do. And others will judge that sense of greatness, I think. And so that task focus and getting better every day and the compounding interest of that kind of level of kind of discipline, self-discipline and focus and intensity towards something that matters to you. I don't know if that's the defining factor, but you don't achieve it without that.
You've spoken a lot about humility, but the more I do this, the more I realise how important curiosity is. And not only curiosity externally, but internally. And I think Johnny Wilkinson just gave the greatest line of all time. I'll butcher it when he was on the High Performance podcast about looking inward. And when you look inward, there's no limit or there's no end. From your experience being around the high performers, can you give us an anecdote around curiosity and how they are constantly striving externally to learn from others, but also internally?
Mm. Well, I think, generally, the, um, talent is self-taught, really. Talent is self-taught generally, and um, you can be coached and curious and hunger, but that curiosity is what makes the coaching stick, what makes you coachable, and so um, sort of an anecdote. I think on a team level, I think the All Blacks who I rode around were really interesting. They would look anywhere for ideas around, so scrummaging, for instance. They uh some of them went to Japan and studied sumo wrestling, tug of war, grappling and US college wrestling. Where can we learn from different domains and apply to our own? And I think curiosity is really about creativity at its heart. It's asking those questions and discovering new answers. And I think if you start to define what a great culture is, and I'm writing about this at the moment, but the idea of creativity needs to be in there. And a lot of the time we sort of think that actually culture is this sort of set of rules or this sort of thing. But actually you want an environment that's really curious, prepared to ask questions, prepared to reinvent itself, that's generative, it generates ideas and it finds new ways of doing things. Because leaders lead, they get there first, and that takes creativity. And so I think curiosity and creativity really go hand in hand. It's like, what can I find out? How can I, if our task is to get better every day, um, what questions do I need to ask? Where do I need to go to learn? Um, and in the process of asking those questions and learning, you're kind of, I think creativity is about associated ideas coming together to make another one, and so you've got to be curious to be, looking for those ideas. Where are they? And then you go, oh, I saw something the other day. And what about this? If you put that together, wow, no one's done that. Well, that's scary. It'll never work. Or, well, maybe it just will. Let's find out. Let's be curious and see if it'll work. Right. So I think it's a really almost, it's a great question. And I think it's a sometimes an unexamined trait, I think, within within groups, within teams.
When you look at teams, and environment is such a key part, particularly beyond that, even just growing up. I was listening or learning a bit about a guy who's doing research around elite athletes and how important environment is. Like even factors like, I never thought of this, having two cars because your parents then have more chance to bring you to training and stuff. That was fascinating to me. How much of this, of all these traits, and if I want to be, geez, a great All Black, like that's a brilliant, well-known term. How much is it innate, environment, and learnt through experience?
Listen, I think all of them are massively impactful. You need a degree of talent to excel in anything. You just do. That doesn't come from nowhere. If you can't spell, you'll never be an English teacher. Well, actually, you probably will. But you know what I mean. You need talent. You do. You need talent, but talent is obviously on its own is not enough. And I think of those two other things, the sort of if the split is right, the sort of background and then a kind of a performance environment that you arrive into. Background's hugely important. It is. We live in an unfair society. Now background can work in one of two ways. Sometimes having an easy background forms complacency and entitlement, and that's not a performance criteria, right? And so sometimes having a chip on your shoulder and going out there to prove yourself and something to play for is massively motivating. You look at college basketball, for instance, in the US. Very fiercely driven human beings. For better or for worse, sometimes for worse, you know. Um, uh, but at the same time, access to facilities, time to do it, less pressure to get a real job. All of those things, conspire in front of, the comfortable middle class, if you like, or whatever. So all of that, yeah, sure, absolutely, that has a huge factor. And then the environment that you arrive into. And actually, that environment is where it all happens. So if I was to rate it, I'd say, well, you need the talent, and you want an environment that brings out the best in you, whatever that is for you. Um, Background, that's really up to you to move forward. We can blame our parents and we can blame our back. Sports an existential practice. It doesn't care about the past much. It's only really interested in what happens in the present based on the future. And I think that's one of the fantastic lessons that we can take from sport. That there's a wonderful line. I think it's from Jung. He says, actually, yeah, I think it's from Jung. He says something like, "You can't rewrite the past, but you can rewrite the ending." I'm paraphrasing. You know, you can't. If what's holding you back is your story about what happened, well, that's up to you. You get to rewrite that. I think it absolutely doesn't make a difference. Does it have an impact? Does it handicap people? Absolutely, it does. But I'm not sure that's a useful mindset to take into from a personal point of view. From a sociological point of view, sure, right? It's worth studying, it's worth looking at, and it's worth trying to redress in one way or the other. In terms of personal performance, you can control the controllables, and it's entirely and absolutely existentially on you. Accountability, responsibility for your own performance has got to be. I talked about self-discipline and that factor, that idea that no one is going to turn up on a charger and save you. It is absolutely on you. That opposite of entitlement. Hand up, it's on me. How can I make this work? It's got to be fundamental to it is fundamental to a high performance mindset.
Another thing I've been kind of going into and looking at is talent. You mentioned it there. What's your definition of talent? Like the Oxford Dictionary, I have it here, is natural aptitude or skill. But what's your interpretation of the word?
Um, well, I'll go with the dictionary to a degree. I think aptitude is, I think I said before, you kind of need, some people play a musical instrument, some people are tone deaf. You've got to have something. Um, I think tenacity is a talent. I think there are a lot of talents that aren't just kick a ball, or whatever that physical talent is. I think there are mentality is a talent. Grit, is a talent. And so I think there are talents that you can cultivate that aren't your, God-given talent. And sometimes you have them and sometimes you can cultivate them. And some people don't have that and some people do. And actually, I think for, you know, I mean, for anyone who's played competitive anything at any level, they know that talent is not enough. Plenty of talented people on their keyboards on the internet telling them what they should do. Plenty, you know. Um, it's tenacity. It's that focus. It's the discipline to get up and do what other people aren't prepared to do. Train twice on Christmas Day or three times just to show everyone who's boss, you know. It's that. So your character is a talent, I would say.
So I suppose where I'm getting to with this is one of the main questions I want to ask you, James, is can anybody be, and I'm using the term great all black just as a vessel of expression for this one, but can anyone really be an elite performer, a great all black, whatever they want to be? Is it just that grit, determination, working on yourself? Obviously, bit of skill. You can't be tone deaf trying to be a brilliant musician, but can anyone really do it?
Well, I think the definition of elite is not everyone can do that. Not everyone can be elite. That's the 1% of the 1%. You know, if you look at the football academies, it's a pyramid, and it's a painful pyramid. There are a lot of talented kids along the way. They're jettisoned at different areas. I can't remember the number. 2% of 2% of 2%, I think. You know, it will ever play just one professional or elite game, right? No, not everyone can make it. Not everyone will make it, but you can be the best you can be, and you have to. And I think it's probably what I was getting at before. You've got to aim for that highest moment. You need to aim for greatness. Now, you may not make it. That's not up to you. But whatever you do, you've got to focus on doing it the best that you can, and being the best that you can be, and learning, and so on. And you know that's not an easy pill to swallow either. You know, because um, you know, the 1% of the 1% or the 2% of the 2%, there's a whole 98 point whatever, 99 point whatever it is, that have to swallow that bitter pill at some point. So no, I don't think everybody can be elite. I think by definition, elite performers are special, and I think it's that combination of sort of mindset and skill set, or talent set, if you like, that sets people apart. And you know, look, if you spend any time around elite athletes, some of them feel like they're a different species. You know, I mean, they do. You know, sometimes and there are not all of them, but even within teams, there are some athletes that make you stop and watch just the way they run. And you go, oh my God, I've never seen that before. You know, and that's extraordinary. It's part of the joy of the job, if you like. But you know, they make it look easy, and because for them it is. So I think, in answer to your question, life's not fair. It's tough. It's you know, getting to the very pinnacle of anything is nearly impossible, but it doesn't mean you can't keep trying and shouldn't aim at it and see where you can get to. And you never know, you might have what it takes.
In terms of the book Legacy, it's probably what you're most well known for. I'll also reference an event I went to last year. You spoke at Essential Skills, but just with the book, going into what, like, observe and be a fly on the wall. Before you went in, what did you expect, and was it what you expected?
Well, I've been inside, you know, similar but different environments before, so I kind of knew a little bit about what to expect. I think that um, you know, the mighty All Blacks are an awesome, intimidating bunch of blokes from the outside. You know, they dress in black. They're the most dominant team in history. It's rugby. You know, they're big. You know, all of that. But you know, I think one of the things that unites really great teams, and I've said this before, but is love. You know, is genuine love, brotherhood, sisterhood. You know, care for each other. Culture, the word culture comes from the same word as to care and to cultivate, to create an environment in which human beings grow. And now, what's the environment in which human beings grow in a family? It's a loving environment. It's a compassionate environment. It's not that doesn't mean it can't be a challenging environment with high standards and high stakes, but underneath it, or maybe woven in it, there's that idea that we're going into, let's say, going into battle together. We've got each other's back. I'll put my body on the line for my brother or my sister, and that's love in its sort of lowercase, love. And so I guess that's something which I was reminded of, if you like, going within that environment. It was a very connected and very deliberately connected place that took care of each other. And, I think there's a lot we can learn in life from that. Sometimes we think we have to be hard as nails to be hard as nails. But actually, sometimes that vulnerability or that openness, the caring for each other is an incredibly powerful. I've said this before again and again. I'm just very conscious of some of these lines before, but we run into burning buildings for love. We up sticks and move to other countries for love. We spend hours thinking what the right present to give is for love. It's a very, very powerful force in life, and it's also the environment in which we feel safe and seen. There's a wonderful quote from John Bowlby, a psychologist, who says, I'm paraphrasing again, but what we need as humans is a safe place from which to boldly venture. And you talked about family background. Maybe that is the key determinant in the family background. Was it a safe place from which to boldly venture? Could you know that you've got a solid ground to take chances and take risks? Are you gonna, if you make a mistake, are you going to be ostracized and that's it forever, or welcomed back and supported in your process of going through it? And great environments are built on love, I think, without being too kind of soft and and because it's so because we feel good, and you want to feel good, to feel connected to yourself, to feel able, to feel confident, to feel trusting, to get into that, if you look at the physiology of it, that kind of reward oriented mindset where you're playing to win. That really is physiological. You want to have enough dopamine in you to activate your systems. And so, one of the things, I've had the privilege of going into a lot of different environments, and the really outstanding ones are very, even when they're tough, military units, they don't take too much bullshit. They tell each other what it is, but they're brothers. They are brothers, and they will go into battle and die for each other. And now that takes a particular kind of emotional connection. They don't necessarily like each other. They're not necessarily best mates, but they love each other for who they are and what they're doing together. And I think that's hugely, hugely important and powerful. And, I and easily upset, easily ruined. If you get if you get a bit of backbiting and backbriefing and bickering and betrayal, and you break trust, as in any team, it tends to be the beginning. What happens off the paddock will play out on the paddock.
What was your experience going in? And I actually have my copy of my book right beside me here, but I know there's a quote on it
Available in all good bookshops.
Yeah, exactly. Um, Anton Oliver has a quote on the back, but just going into that sacred space, how did the team react to someone writing a book about them, but also afterwards, what was the reaction?
Well, the I actually did the when I first went in was to do a book called Mana, and it was with a photographer as well. Um, and the and as I say, I felt very welcomed. There was a bit of sort of mission creep that led to Legacy. It wasn't my intention going in to look at that, but I realized the sort of worlds combined. I was quite careful to, although I told stories from behind the scenes, pretty much, I mean, everything else had really been discussed publicly in one way or another. Um, so I didn't want to give away rugby secrets, but I was able to weave together a story of sort of how they did it. But it was really based on some principles that really are at home out of identity building and culture building from other domains. So um, you know, anytime you get a scoop in one way or another, there's always people who kind of will question it, and I think that's fair enough as well. I had some real fans within the leadership group and a couple of dissenting voices who thought, oh well, maybe this is too much. Uh, I don't think anyone's too unhappy about it now. They get plenty of speaking gigs, and it's opened a lot of doors. So I will put that out there. Um, and I think it's also opened up. In a way, I'm pleased. Certainly in New Zealand rugby, if anyone there is listening, it seems to have opened up a model where that a lot of the rugby industry has realized just how much it's got to offer and to teach around leadership. And so there's the Crusaders leadership program. There are various programs that have really come out since Legacy came out, and so I think I'd like to, without blowing too much, but so I've been told, it kind of opened a way of looking at sport as a translating from a sporting domain into another domain, because the sporting values, particularly rugby values, I think, but the sporting values and the learning from that is so immensely valuable. And so I'll take a little bit of criticism on the chin because I can see the positive impact it's had. And I think the privilege that I've had to see with Legacy is that, and the part that's delighted me the most is seeing young people use it as a blueprint for designing a life, and for realizing that authenticity and values and character and developing a sense of purpose and working on themselves in order to get better every day. If it's done nothing for sport, it's gone into a lot of different environments, but I think the one that I feel most proud of is that, because I think that one of the jokes I used to make is that I wanted to write a self-help book that men could read on the tube without embarrassment, because there's a lot of flaky hokey stuff around, but this is the real deal. This is the people who get somewhere. They don't get anywhere there by accident. Self-development in one form or another is really important. But it's sort of got a bit of a bad rep, the sort of self-help industry and all of that. So I wanted to kind of do work around that. And so when I work with schools, for instance, I can see just how valuable that is. It's really important, I think. And I think it's really one of the things that sport can give back to communities, that what we've learned out on the paddock to bring off the paddock and share. And I think that's really important. So I'll take whatever one-eyed Kiwi rugby fan wants to say about it, and I'll give them that and say, well, do your best, but I sort of stand by the work.
What do you say to people that read the book and try to copy and paste it like for like into their team, business, or area?
Yeah, well, I think that's a great question, and I think they've slightly missed the point if they do that. And there have been organizations that have done that. Some of them quite moderately successfully. It's about developing your own DNA. It's about self-knowledge. It's not attaching someone else's and copying it. That's a cul-de-sac. That's a one-way street that leads nowhere. You know, um, it's a great identity, a great culture is about um, identity kind of central to that idea of culture, that kind of idea of ethos. Who are we? What do we stand for? How we do things? How are we going to win? It's really a story, an identity story, I think. And um, part of the achieving it is the archaeology of it, is the digging for it, the self-discovery that it's part of. Slapping something else on top is not that, right? And we talked about curiosity, and we talked about when you look inside, the Johnny Wilkins thing, when you look inside, it's limitless. The point, I think, of really engaging in those questions of identity, of ethos, of values and vision and purpose and standards and who we are and what we stand for and why we play, right? They're massive questions of personal identity and our personally attaching to the collective purpose. And you can't just stick that on. You got to do the digging, and psychology, you got to do the work. And it's the doing the work that does the work, you know. Otherwise, it's just a PowerPoint presentation.
Exactly. Did the book change you or the way you think at all, James, or writing it?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, I think of Legacy as a book about parenthood, actually. My kids were reasonably, fresh into the world at the time, and I was just getting to grips with what that idea of fatherhood was about, which is a form of leadership, I think, and how you know the Tom Peters quote: Leaders don't create followers; they create other leaders." And that really the role of a parent is to create an environment of love in which other human beings grow and become what they're capable of becoming. That's coaching, to take them where they want to get to, where they want to get to, not where you want them to be because it looks good for you as a parent, but what's true for them, unlocking intrinsic motivation. And so I think, there's a line: you don't want to write what you know, you want to write what you want to know. And so the act of writing, I think it's like the act of excavating your identity as an ethos. The act of writing a book, or certainly for me, the act of writing this book was an act of self-discovery and finding what I want to know. And I think maybe that's part of its success, perhaps. That it was like, I think, and again, this is a sort of lesson for identity stuff. The specific is the universal. You can get really specific and really into exactly what it is. Then chances are it has a resonance beyond yourself, because other people, as I said at the beginning, everybody's different, but everybody's the same. We're all searching for some of those insights or secrets or things to help us. The Ram Dass quote: "We're all walking each other home. We're heading to the same place." You know, um, we've got this time together on Earth. How are we going to connect? How are we going to help out each other be better? How are we going to survive, prosper together? And if you bring those sort of questions, I think life's a team game. And if you're just thinking about, me, it doesn't tend to be a very good, you're not creating much value out there. And so I think, in answer to your question, sorry, long way around, if I looked at it through the prism of fatherhood, and I learned I was learning a lot because kids are like the world's. A friend of mine says the world's biggest biology experiment. You're learning a lot every day, but also you start to learn, or certainly I started to learn about what I thought was most important in life. And it's not things, it's people.
What was Sweep the Sheds is God, it's I can nearly have a euro for every time I heard it. But what was the piece of the book that didn't get the attention or the importance that you think it should? What are people overlooking that was in the book that's so important?
Hmm. Um, that's a really good question. I think well, I think the kind of recency bias would be that kind of idea that culture comes from within, that DNA question, because some people have missed that. Um, I think I think the um I and so I guess it probably is that it's around that authenticity. One of the chapters is really around authenticity. And although it's there, it's embedded, I think maybe it doesn't get talked. I mean, one of the nice things, Sweet the Shed, it's a good hook. As an ad man, you know, you want a good headline, a good hook, a hook to hang things on. No dickheads. It's a great headline. Language matters, you know, and it's partly underneath partly also what it's a little bit about is how can you use, there's a lovely line I think from a reverend American holy man who says, words create worlds. um, the language you use and the language you bring starts to create the environment that we live in. And um, so I think, that parable and proverb, all blacks sweeping up after themselves, and the hook, the proverb, sweep the sheds, is an ancient way of communicating. And so I think it has its own power in that sense. Um, so there's probably chapters that the headline didn't hit as hard, you know. Um, but I think that authenticity piece, really understanding that originality and authenticity are the same thing somehow. That you can't be your best and be someone else. You know, it's why when you were saying, com- good versus great, although I understand the concept and stuff, it's the wrong question to be asking yourself, I think. Oneself. I think you got to be going, am I just gooder than I was yesterday? Am I just a bit better than I was yesterday? And what's my definition of great? And so, words create worlds. How do we use language that's true for us um and that sort of honors our own DNA, our own kind of deep roots, if you like. And I think that's such an important part of a good identity story. The book I'm writing at the moment, part of it uses that sort of tree metaphor of the roots. You want to you there's a line in the roots, the fruits. That not my line, not my headline, but in the roots, the fruits, that you want to stand in ground and grow in your ground, you know, and that's where a lot of power is. The world will keep moving, but you've got a strong place to stand, that secure base from which to boldly venture. So maybe that's something that hasn't been explored quite as much, but I think is really important.
One of your well known lines, I'll reference it, is first we shape our story, then our story shapes us. When I first read and heard that, there's a piece of learning from it, but also I felt a sense of empowerment from it, that you can really shape and control it. And one of the other lines I probably go into a bit more, heard on a podcast that you did about environment, because I'm sure there's a few people listening who are cynics and say, oh yeah, but that's easy when you're in the All Blacks and you have a perfect environment. But you were saying environment, you're in control of your state and the climate that I create within the culture I inhabit. So even though if it is maybe not the greatest of environments, that you still have that control and don't forget, because you can still shape your story.
Yeah, you can only you got to do the best you can with what you've got, and it's not always ideal ever. It's not ideal ever. You need to thrive in difficult circumstances. Whatever it is, nothing, you're always carrying a niggling, if we take the sporting thing, there's a niggling injury, it's raining, it's you take a bit of a bang at in the first 5 minutes, you're always, nothing's the environment, so what do you do with that? Again, coming down to that existential accountability for everything. It's like there is no one to blame, you know um and it's on you. So you want to take responsibility for your life, and that comes down to one of the miracles of neuroscience that we know is that we can reframe our worlds. Cognitive behavioral therapy, narrative therapy, or narrative practice, um if we can shift the paradigm of is life a struggle or is life a dance? Now, it can seem corny, right? But if you choose that life's going to be a dance, let's say, and it's been a struggle, it's been a struggle, and you've got plenty of evidence that it's a struggle. You're just meeting your bills, or you're not. Your car breaks down, and life's a struggle. Or you go, actually, life's a dance. Well, I'll duck and dive a little bit. I'll get that bill paid, and I'll borrow a car, and da da da. Then, those stories tend to come true for us. Not always. You might get hit by a bus tomorrow. That we can't control that. But those fundamental kind of metaphors that we live by, or perceptions, or paradigms, or schemas, whatever we call them, that we frame our life in, really define the way we see the world and the way the world sees us. And that nature and nurture, I think, work together to create certain outcomes. So you want to be very deliberate about the language you use, the way you speak to yourself, your self-talk, and you can construct it, and you can decide what it is. You can go, look, we do it when we change careers, for instance. We talked before this. You talked about your career as an athlete, and then you went, "Well, I'm not that anymore. What am I? I'm going to be a coach. And then what am I?" In a way, when we get to those moments where we crystallize that, the name we give what we do, even everything changes. Now, it's not just changing the name that does it. That's the kind of the symbol of it, right? We're pushing towards it. But the film director Robert Rodriguez did Desperado and all sorts of films. He was asked, "How do I become a director?" And he said, "Get a business card made with your name and director underneath it, and give it to people. Then you have to be." Right? And it's kind of true. We live into that story that we tell about ourselves. And that story doesn't always come true. It's not guaranteed to come true. It's not an easy fix. I'm not saying it's just say it and it all happens. But unless you do say it, it doesn't happen. You kind of got to claim it. And, I talk about in the book, there's in Australian Aboriginal Koori beliefs. And Bruce Chapman writes in a book called Songlines. They are young men, but they meet in corroboree, and then they go out on walkabout, and they walk the song lines. Now, along those song lines, they sing, and in that belief system, they believe that they are singing the world into existence. They are creating the world through their song. And I think there's an intrinsic truth and insight in that kind of what we put out there is what we become to a degree. And I say to a degree because, as I say, for the cynics out there, I don't want you to be going, "Yeah, it's not as easy as that." No, of course it's not. It's not as easy as that at all. But I do know that when you start to decide to be something, and you can be clear about it, and you get clarity and focus, on what that is and what that means and what standards you need to adhere to and what behaviors are required to bring that about, you've got a lot bigger chance of making that elite level. Bill Walsh, in his book "In the School Will Take Care of Itself," said something along the lines of, you don't. That's the championship behaviors come well before the championship. You need to define what are they, and as a parent, let's say, to the parents out there, you might go, well, what's my playing philosophy as a parent? Have I thought about that? Have I defined it? Am I living that every day? Because, if you're in default and your default mood, you might be grumpy and disempowering all the time, not answering their questions, putting them down, not even knowing you're doing it. But if you say, actually, my role as a parent is to create an environment in which my children thrive, what is that? What does that look like? You've begun with language. Words create worlds. And at least that story starts to shape your what you're looking for, where you're putting your attention, the way you behave, and you hold yourself to account to that. So when you're having a bad day and you just want to curl up on the television and ignore your kids, you might go, but that's not my commitment as a parent. And I don't know if we ever do a good job as parents, but we're certainly going to do a better job with that. Anyway, a long answer. I hope that has some relevance.
No, it did. I really enjoyed listening to that. The other piece I wanted to touch on, conscious of time as well, please let me know, is around retirement. And one of the pieces that you spoke about in London that really struck a chord was a couple of things that you get when you're an All Black. One of them being a number, one of them being a book. And I remember you saying about the book, it was all pictures before, and then it's kind of where you are, and then it's blank pages for the rest. So it kind of builds on legacy, kind of builds on a little bit around, also from a legacy point of view, but also your time here is finite. And I love the piece in the kind of the opening of the book, the acknowledgement at the start, your notes about the hacker reminds us of how fragile life is, and really, I think you spoke about it as well. You're only forget the word, but you're only holding on to the jersey and you're passing it on. But that also plays a part into retirement and realizing that there will be an end to this. So how do the All Blacks prepare if I'm in the peak of my powers, or I'm starting to kind of, go down and get a bit older and maybe move on? How would the All Blacks prepare them though to move on?
I'm not sure I can speak for the All Blacks in this, but on the idea of retirement, there's a very good book, Sebastian Junger, called Tribe. And I don't know if you've come across it, read it.
I've heard of it. I haven't read it yet.
Yeah, the kind of the insight in the book, the discovery in the book was that a lot of American soldiers coming back from Iraq were suffering from PTSD. But there were more people, from my memory of it, there were more people reporting symptoms of PTSD, kind of looping and persistent, all of that stuff, than actually saw action. So traditionally, we'd seen it as, shell shock, but so they looked into it, and it became clear that really it was the separation from meaning that made a massive difference. That if you've had every day of your life organized and focused around a specific goal in sport or in military, and it's meaningful, it's purposeful, and you're sharing it with people, that's a very, very connected, strong, purposeful, meaningful environment. And then you're suddenly out and you're stacking shelves somewhere in middle America, if you're former soldier. No one quite understands what you've been through, and you can't see the point of what you're doing. Then I think I know that's dispiriting, anxiety, depression, too much time to think, alcohol, dopamine distraction. whatever that means, scrolling or drugs, you know. Now that happens for people coming out of sport, elite sport. If you're in the Premier League and you play a couple of games a week, say, and you get these dopamine spikes because the crowd's chanting your name and you get to score a goal, and then suddenly you take a knock on your knee and you suddenly find your career's over. That's hard. And people go, oh, poor things, they paid so much money. They're human beings. That's hard. And it's very, very difficult. And so what do you need? You need community and you need purpose, right? You need community and purpose. You need, you know, something to do, someone to love, and something to look forward to, is the cliche. We need that in life. We need structures of meaning. Now, one of the things as a coach I work with is, how do you create a platform for high performance, called the four-legged stool or four-legged chair. It's used around the place. And there's a lot of sort of psychology behind it, but of being four kind of zones or domains, and this varies for different people. But one of them is around performance. You want to be good at what you want to be good at, mastery. You want to build that leg on your chair, but on its own, once that's gone, the whole lot falls down, right? So you want to build your physical being. You want to be in good health. You want to be fit. Now, sports people normally are, but you want to protect yourself physically. You don't want too many concussions, because in the future that's not a good thing. You want to take care of your body. You want to take care of your so that's another leg on the chair. You've got another leg on the chair, which is your relationships. And that tends to be intimate relationships, family, friendships, teammates, wider colleagues, society, the person you buy a newspaper from, or in the old days of newspapers, copy. The newspapers still exist, I don't know. And then the third, and so that's your third leg. You want to be building that. You want to maintain that. And then your fourth leg is sort of, I call it dog, God or a dog. As something beyond yourself, the spiritual dimension, in one way or another. Nature, walks in nature, painting, art, creativity, music, listening to music, making music, connecting with animals, whatever it is. And have that. Now, that's a really well-balanced life. Those are the basics that human beings need and want. And we, to create sustainable success, you can create short-term success by just focusing on mastery. And professional athletes are called to this all the time. They don't have a life. But I think those successful ones, the ones that have a longevity in their career, and that transition more readily into life after sport, or whatever, life after, even retirement in your 60s or 70s or whenever. I never want to retire. I just want to evolve, to wrestle my pen from me. Can you build those platforms so that you've got a stable place to sit? So I think it's sort of an answer to your question, not the way the All Blacks do it, but the way that I would approach it is, you go, in your life, are you building a life? Are you investing yourself in making sure you stay in touch with your mates? They keep you honest. Making sure that rather than, if you're traveling a lot, make sure that your partner or your other half is connected with, and all of that. Be related to, take care of your body, take care of your performance, take care of your people, and also just take care of your spirit. Be able to be happy with nothing. And if you're able to cultivate that, then I think that moment that suddenly you take that knock to the knee, and the performance thing doesn't matter, and all the status and all the glory and all the dopamine that you get from that, you've got three other legs to sit on. And then you can rebuild a new level of mastery, but the whole thing doesn't fall down and collapse in a screaming heap. So that would be my take on kind of building for a life beyond football or beyond work, or just building a life.
Amazing. I am definitely going to rob that analogy of the four stools in the chair. James, what do you know for sure about the work that you do and the world that you're in?
Wow, that's a
That's
question.
that's
What
from
do
Oprah.
for
It's not
sure?
mine.
Yeah, that's a beauty. What do I know for sure? I know for sure there's always more to know. Like Socrates, I know nothing. The more I know, the more I know nothing, kind of thing. I think um, the more I know, the older I get and the more experience I get. There's a Maori proverb: "It's the people, it's the people, it's the people." It's the people, and it's about connection. It's about sharing moments together. It's about making each other better. It's about contribution to others. It's about um, uh, it's about doing the best with what you've got. It's talent in any way is a gift. You've been given it. You didn't earn it. You're born with it often. Or that intrinsic talent isn't your responsibility if it's a gift given to you to give it to someone else, to pass it on, to somehow contribute, and to use that gift for something worthwhile. And I don't say that in a sort of hippie altruistic way. I think that's where satisfaction lies. Unused gifts eat us up. And the way that we use gifts is through contributing to something bigger than ourselves, not because we're Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts and it's what we should do, but because actually that's where genuine happiness lies, satisfaction lies, in the giving of oneself to a cause that makes a difference. There's a great line, I don't know where it comes from, but what we all want is a meaningful role in something meaningful, you know? Sort of role, goal, and soul, all of that. How do we find something to give our life to and for? I think they're really important questions of purpose, but also of sort of using our strengths, our gifts in a way that um, makes the most of them, that makes the most of us, and makes a difference. And again, I said it's not just as a, goody two shoes. I actually think we get a lot more out of it than we even put into it when we think that way.
Yeah. One of my other favourite questions is, what's the biggest misconception about elite athletes and elite sports teams?
Um, that the money matters. Funnily enough, there's a lot of stuff. Oh, they get Premiership football. They get paid millions. Why are they complaining? Because they're human. Why aren't they trying? Well, they probably are. They get paid so much, they should be better than this. Well, they're usually being the best they can be. That sort of false equation between um, extrinsic motivation and intrinsic motivation. That, yeah, we're motivated often by, hey, I'll move to a better paying job, right? It's usually a bad decision, right? You want to move to a job where you learn something, where you're challenging yourself, where you're taking yourself to the next level. Usually, if you're motivated by money, it's a short-term gain and a long-term pain. So that's the first thing that comes up for me.
Interesting. That's actually what a lot of people have said. Is they're
Really?
human.
Yeah,
Yeah, they forget.
yeah, that human.
Yeah, they forget that it's the same. They've the same struggles. Yes, they get paid hundreds of thousands of pounds or euro or dollars or whatever it is, but it's the same. And
They're human,
yeah,
and comments on Instagram hurt, and they don't always want to turn up to work. and sometimes Monday morning is just Monday morning, because even though it's glamorous in its job, it's a grind. If you're a professional footballer, you're playing a lot of football. You got to go through all of those things. People get bored, people get hurt, people get disillusioned, people get depressed, people get anxious. People lose their confidence. People dream about doing other things. They get distracted. People form addictions. People fall out with each other. All of the stuff of what it is to be human happens within an elite environment just as much, sometimes more so, because it's a more of a pressure cooker situation than in other situations. Everybody is fundamentally, in a good, sticky way, human. It's the people, it's the people, it's the people.
Brilliant. I'm going to need to go to the sideline 7, which wraps the episode. I do
Okay.
have an extra
Been looking forward to this.
an extra 2 pages of an A4 notebook. Hopefully we can sit down again. I've loved this, really to have.
Yeah, me too.
Sideline 7, same 7 questions at the end of every episode. You are probably one of the biggest quotes men I know, James. So what is your favorite quote?
Okay, yeah, I like my quotes. Again, I like my quotes because you can go hang stuff off it. Um, Pericles, the Athenian statesman. I wrote a note. I cheated and prepared for this one. Your achievements are not written on stone monuments. They're woven into the lives of others. Your achievements are not written on stone monuments. When they bury you, they're not gonna they might mention that you won a cup once, but but it's what you meant to them that people will talk about. Your characteristics, your character, the impact that you made. That's, I think, what matters. I had a sorry, this is supposed to be
Go
short.
for it.
This I had a health emergency 3 or 4 years ago, and I wasn't sure if I was going to make it exactly. I thought I probably would, but I didn't know. And it was during COVID. It wasn't COVID, but it was. And I lay in a hospital bed for a little while and thought, had a lot of time to think because COVID slowed everything down. There wasn't a bed for me at the other end, all of that. Um, and and so my life flashed before, well, in slow motion, flashed before my eyes. Now, what was I thinking about? I wasn't thinking about my regrets because there's nothing I could do about that. I wasn't really thinking about my achievements, right? I was thinking about, and it's a cliche, but it's true. I was thinking about doing the things I loved with the people I loved. That's what my life meant to me at the end, or what could have been the end, and it wasn't. And I'm fine. And thanks for your concern. And no cards. It's okay. I'm good. Um, but the stuff you do with the people that you love matters. And I think that's true for teams. Saracens, the rugby team, kind of, got into a bit of trouble later on, but they shifted from being quite a transactional retirement fund for former Springboks under Brendan Ventnor, and they started talking about making memories. I'm not sure the exact phrase, but making memories together. Because that's sort of what it's about. If you go and you win a cup final, it's really when you bump into each other in 10 years' time or 20 years' time, it'll be, oh man, wasn't that amazing? Wow, that's the juice, right? So, your achievements aren't written on stone monuments. No one really cares that you were the sort of, they do, but they don't. What they really care about, and I think what we all really care about, is those moments that we share with each other when we fulfill our dreams together, the things that we really want to do, the stuff we love with people we love. And so for me, that quote kind of encapsulates what I think legacy is really about. It's not about the profit and loss column, and it's not about the cups. They're the byproduct of making amazing memories together.
Have you come across Jim Gavin before?
No, I
So,
haven't actually.
currently actually going to potentially be our president of Ireland, potentially, but a sports background involved with the Dublin senior football team. When you talk about
Are you?
legacy, 5 in a row, and all this stuff, but he did a talk in Belfast and talked about kind of similar to what you said. And he had a quote from Nelson Mandela. I've opened the page from his notes on that. It was what or is it? I'm paraphrasing now, but it's the difference we have made to the lives of others what determines the significance of the lives we've had. And that line comes to
Beautiful.
mind. Yeah.
Exactly. It's true. It's completely true. And well, it's true for me. It main, I think everyone has got to get to where they get to. Completely true for me. And I think that, making a difference, making an impact, adding value, even, we're rarely rewarded in life for the value we create for others in many ways. If you're a successful business, it's because you're creating value for others. I think people go, sure, capitalism can get out of control, but generally, businesses that are successful because they fulfill the needs and add value to other people. And I think if we see ourselves as kind of value creators, how can we create value for other people? The score will take care of itself. We'll get value back. It's what we put out there is what we get back. There's a law of reciprocity that exists somehow in this world, and um, that sort of servant mindset, servant leader mindset, is a very powerful one because you're creating possibility for other people. And when you create possibility for other people, all kind of boats rise on that tide, I think.
100%. Question two: the best sporting event you've been to?
Oh well, I looked at this. I think the 1990 second Ashes test between Australia, the Kangaroos, and the Lions was at Old Trafford, and I was on the bench with the Kangaroos, and it was going to extra time, and and a player called Ricky Stewart broke the line. They're way back in Australian territory. He sort of sold a dummy and he ran up the sideline right in front of the bench, and you could see his eyes, kind of scanning. And he released a pass to the captain Mal Meninga, who went over for this extraordinary try, and um, and it was just this turning point in the fortunes of this team. And I was right, the mud getting kicked up was hitting me, kind of thing. So when I read that question, that's the first thing I thought of. But I also the 2015 Rugby World Cup final where New Zealand did the business in Old Trafford in Twickenham. I love that. But my actual answer is my son Charlie winning the 100 meter and 800 meters in his high school in his school because there's nothing better than watching your kids um, be the best they can be. That's my soppy answer.
Amazing. I love it. Question three: biggest setback or challenge so far in your career, and how did you react to it?
Yeah, I when I first moved to London, I came from Australia. I was in advertising, and I was doing really well and still young. And I moved to London just as the advertising industry kind of collapsed. There was a massive recession hit, Black Friday, everything kind of fell apart, and I couldn't get a job. And I come to London to go into advertising because London was the mecca for global creative advertising. I couldn't get a job, but it sort of proved to be the making of me, and that I started using the same talent, if you like, first in sort of in identity consultancy and brand consultancy, and I discovered this world that was much more around culture and leadership and how words create worlds, you know. And so when I look back at my career, although it was a tough one to swallow, it was deeply disappointing. At the time, it turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me. Um, so I would say that kind of not making it in London advertising. Um, uh, I remember there was the one of the first days I was there, there was the a headline in one of the papers was, 50 teams sacked from Saatchi and Saatchi or something, or 50 creators, 25 teams maybe. And I thought, I've come to the wrong place at the wrong time. It's a bloodbath out there. And but because it made me kind of repurpose my talents, and I've discovered this world that was actually bigger and more interesting. Advertising is like the tail on the dog. This was the head of the. This is the head. I realized that creativity as a sort of strategic driver of performance was something that I could do. And so it was that, I think, probably that pivot that's seemed like the worst thing and turned out to be the best.
Amazing. On the flip side, your biggest achievement in or outside of sport?
Oh, I missed this one. I mean, I think it's probably got to be legacy. It's probably got to be the success of that. I no one thinks their book is going to be read by anyone except for their mother, and even their mother will probably lie, skim read it. So it's pretty amazing to hugely humbling to have. Um, I think the success of a book is just finishing it. That's hard enough, and everything else is just is great. And but I've been lucky enough that it's found an audience, and it's obviously hit a nerve or fulfilled something, um, and that people read it. And I love that sweep the sheds is almost a cliche. Leave the jersey in a better place, almost a cliche now. I kind of love that, and I think that's where. So it's got to be that, I think.
When did you realise that it struck a chord? What was the first kind of inkling towards it?
Um, well, I knew that it was sort of getting a lot of interest, but um, when a Super Bowl coach quoted it before the Super Bowl, thought, well, that seems to have that's done all right. That's that was all right. I mean, it was I've forgotten his name actually.
You're just so
Quinn.
many people are quoting your book.
There's
You just
so
can't
many
keep it.
people like Quinn. And he the story about it, he was coaching the Falcons who played the Patriots, and it was the great comeback Super Bowl where the Falcons were up whatever it was, and in the final quarter the Patriots came back under Tom Brady with Edelson and Grock and all of that lot and won. And so I don't know if it did them much good, but I did think, wow, that's pretty cool. I did. You got to, as a boy from New Zealand who sort of, followed his dreams. That was pretty cool. That was pretty cool.
That's pretty cool. Looking back, what advice would you give your 18-year-old self?
Oh, I wrote here: buy Apple, Google, and Bitcoin.
Be in early before everyone else.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just no, just buy and hold. You know, buy and hold. I think if we bring back to that, it's just I think it's probably, there's a Joseph Campbell quote, Amanda quotes is, follow your bliss. Not just do what you love, because it's not that, but find what you're good at and what you love and what creates value, and just get good at that. Be good at that, because that's a good life, and it will tend to create value. And when you create value, you get value. You look after that, it'll look after you, I think. And by Apple, Google, and video.
Question 6: dream dinner guest and why?
Well, on this one, I went kind of Michelangelo because I've just been to Rome and seen the Sistine Chapel, and the Last Judgment. I just think is the most extraordinary thing. Um, I put Edmund Hillary because he's a Kiwi who I love. I love that kind of just get the job done thing. Uh, conference with Robin Williams once, and he was the most extraordinary human I think I've ever come close to. One of them. So I put him because this is obviously a dinner party, not one. And then, of course, I thought, well, he's gone now, so it would be bringing him back. All of them are gone. So I thought my grandmother, Jojo, who was this incredible woman, and everyone loves their grandmother, but I love my grandmother, and so I think she would be my dream dinner guest because she would be alive
Yeah.
and there I get to hang out with her.
Amazing. You did what everyone does, they just cheat. So no one ever sticks to one, so that's fine.
No, no, good. Good.
You mentioned you're writing another book. I obviously have bought and read Legacy. But if your life was a book, James, what chapter would this be called?
Um, I think this would be called the second half. The second half, like what's next? I think this the you know there's a technique and mental skills technique which is to win, WIN. What is next? What is next? And I think I always want to have my head in a place that is, however old and decrepit I get, that what's next? What's next? And so maybe it should be called What Is Next, when, what is next, something like that. But I want to be putting my foot forward somehow. So second half, first half is just calm. I've you know stopped for 15 minutes. I've rebooted, realigned myself. I'm coming back on for the second half.
Okay. Well, you've had a very exciting first half. I'm excited to see what's in the second half. You've hinted at another book. Can you give us a slight preview? What's to come?
Yeah, I mean, some of the stuff we've been talking about is some of the areas that it's covering. It's called Ethos. It's a kind of playbook for high performance. Um, and it is around that, first we sort of shape our story and then our story shapes us. The story we tell ourselves becomes the story others tell about us. um how do we define, the sort of process I use with teams is around define, design, and deliver. You want to get clear on who you are, where you're going, and why it matters, and what your standards and expectations are, and what your behaviors are. Get really clear. Then you want to design an environment around it, around yourself that supports that. You know, a verbal environment, visual environment, rituals, all of that stuff, systems, processes, and practice habits, all of that stuff that fulfills that kind of clarity, if you like, or that mission that you're on. And then deliver, which is really who am I being in order to become what I'm capable of becoming. And so I really want to try to join that up somehow. It's taken a lot longer than I thought it would to try to do that, but I'm excited. I'm learning and loving the process. And again, I don't know if it'll anyone, even my mother will read it. Who
Well, I'll
knows?
definitely read it anyway.
Okay, well, that's one reader. Cha-ching, that's great. But but I'm loving the process and I'm learning. And I think if I can be kind of loving and learning, um, maybe that'll come through. That'll be between the lines, I hope. So hopefully next year, I will have loved and learned and finished. And I have a very patient publisher, so he's probably getting less patient as he listens to this. He's like, "What are you doing talking? Get to the point." But I'm kind of loving it. It's been a really incredible kind of learning experience, trying to kind of crystallize the thinking into one
Incredible.
narrative.
James, I'll wrap it up on that note as the publisher is wondering why I've caught you for so much time. It's been an
Yeah. No, no, listen, it's been a real pleasure talking. I've really enjoyed it. Again, I hope it adds some value. I hope for whoever's listening, I hope you've listened to the end. Good night, if you have. And the there's a lovely line that I'm not this is not my original. I'm quoting somewhere else, but I don't want to be a sage on the stage. I just want to be a guide at the side. And I'm figuring it out as I go along, and I think that's what we can do for each other, is help each other have the conversations that help crystallize things. So it's been a real pleasure kind of figuring it out as we go along in this conversation, and I hope that it's add value to whoever is still listening on this. So thank you very much, Orla, for having me. I really appreciate it.
Amazing. Appreciate the kind words, and also appreciate how you managed to add a second quote into the sideline 7.
Yeah, I'll bang it on, and I've got many more.
Brilliant, James. Thanks a million.